So people are torn about Auburn. They know that the SEC is a really good conference. It's not the same SEC as before. Auburn is not a good team. I don't know how they're on the bubble, but they are. They have a good offense, trash defense, and it doesn't help that they've played. It does help it, in fact, that they've played 16 quad one opponents, one of the hardest schedules you could say. But their 7-13 record in those quad 1 and 2 games doesn't really help. They just lost at home to Ole Miss. They do have they could be in that 11 seed in the SEC tournament, and they could have a gauntlet of opponents that they could beat on a way to a potential bid. But will they though? Like, why are we still entertaining Auburn make the case for Auburn? Why are we still entertaining them as a bubble team this year?
Sure. So, I mean, the main argument for Auburn boils down to really two key things. One is that they have played the second most difficult strength of schedule in the country and the 13th most difficult non-conference strength of schedule in the country, which the selection committee has historically had a very high tolerance for teams that do that. I can think of some teams in the past. That Michigan State team in 2024 that I had as a last four-in team in Dayton, they were a 9 seed. Well, that's because they played the 10th toughest schedule in the country. Just Baylor last year was a team that was kind of dealing with the same situation as Auburn in terms of their overall record. They were able to win a handful of games at the end of the year. I think they went into the tournament at 18-14 and were still able to scrape out a 9 seed. So the selection committee has had a pretty high tolerance for teams that schedule difficult. And Auburn is still in the conversation because of the games that they've won. The wins have always been more important than the losses. They won at Florida. They're the only team in the country that has done that. They beat Arkansas, they beat Texas, they beat Kentucky at home, and in non-conference play, they beat NC State and they beat St. John's. So they are certainly not lacking on wins over teams that are in the at-large field presently. That's what their entire argument is predicated on. The big argument, of course, against Auburn is a very simple one. They've lost too much, At 15-14 overall, the worst record that a team that has ever gotten into the tournament as an at-large in terms of games above 500 is 2, and that hasn't happened since 2001. Georgia was 16-14 that year, and they played one of the most difficult schedules of all time, according to KenPom. Is Auburn going to be afforded the same kind of leniency? Maybe, because, like I said, they were able to win at Florida. They were able to do good work in non-conference play. I think maybe the magic number for them is 2 games above 500. I would still want to see them get up to 3 before I feel any sort of comfort about that. But as they sit right now at 1 game above 500, you got to keep a team like that on the outside of the field, or else, what kind of message are we sending here where you can lose half of your games and still make the NCAA tournament? Doesn't matter how tough your schedule is if you're not winning enough of those games. And so, that's kind of where I stand on Auburn right now is, yes, they're still hanging around the conversation because they've scheduled tough. They're just not winning enough.
It's interesting too, because I think they're one of those teams that if they win 2 games in their conference tournament, which would be any of maybe Arkansas, Missouri, Tennessee, Vandy, Texas, Texas A&M, I'd be like, put them in no matter what. I just don't think that they will. Like you said, they have a win over great teams that are most likely going to be top 3 seeds in the NCAA tournament. You cannot put it, for me, at least, and the committee, they do love, like you said, teams that schedule hard. But I just think when you lose that many games, and I think they have LSU to finish out the season. If they don't have a good showing in the conference tournament right now, I think they're kind of locked into that 11, maybe that 12 spot in the SEC. Are we all of a sudden saying that a bottom 4 or bottom 5 team in a conference is good enough to make the big dance? Like, I just think it's a very slippery slope. And when you have because that's what the SEC is at this point, a mega conference. How good are the teams that are at the bottom? Because Auburn, to me, is not a top 64 team in the country.